Hey, it's the Husker247 Podcast. On Monday, I'm Michael Bruntz, joined by Brian Christopherson. Busy weekend, lots to get to in this episode. We'll go a little bit longer today. Let's start with the weekend, Brian. How was yours? It was busy.
It was busy, but it was good because I like when the answers come sooner than later. I don't like when there's all this just in stuff in the air for 2 weeks about is it this guy, is it that guy? Oh, did you see what Flight Aware had with this? So there was a little misdirection. I don't know all what's what necessarily from how it went down. I actually thought when the weekend began, there might be another coordinator that was the name Nebraska hired, but um, I'm excited to talk about the new guy. He's definitely an interesting hire.
So let's recap a little bit for those who stepped away for the weekend. Nebraska on Friday had narrowed in, or at least was linked closely, according to multiple reports, our reporting, Toledo defensive coordinator Vince Karras, who was a very popular option, by the way,
Yeah.
on the defensive coordinator carousel. Also, you also had Jason Candle at Toledo get the UConn job in the middle of all that. Um, he ends up going to Syracuse, and Nebraska had to pivot a little bit, and they pivoted very, very quickly. And on Sunday, we learned that Nebraska has hired San Diego State defensive coordinator Rob Orich.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I'll start real quickly with Karras because he was such a popular name for like 48 to 72 hours. It felt like within, I don't know, it's not like my mom was in on his name and like you're probably your average person in the state, but like Husker Twitter and that sort of realm was all about him. And like Friday, we were like, okay, it feels like this is picking up steam. It felt like Nebraska had a conversation maybe very early in the week with him too. That's at least what we gathered. Of course, you never know quite what's what. But the other thing was Saturday morning, independently, someone told us, well, on Toledo's end, they're kind of thinking that Nebraska Karras thing's going to happen. And so
Yeah.
that's where we were with it. So I thought at like noon Saturday, that might be the deal. And then by 2:00, it's like, nope, he's going to Syracuse. And by Sunday afternoon, with 5 minutes left in the Nebraska Creighton game, the Huskers hire, I think you'd call him an up and comer DC who's about to jump into the big leagues and show what his curveball can do. In Rob Orich, who had a great year at San Diego State, and of course the question will be, does he, about experience and all that. It's hard to argue with his recent results, what he did with the Aztecs, and also before that with Idaho. So we can go through some of that. But on our site, we have a bunch of the stats and things, and they were like a top 5 defense across the board in a lot of areas. So there's things to like there for sure.
So let's run through just some superlatives because he's got kind of a unique path. Like you said, he was at Idaho, the defensive coordinator there for Jason Eck.
Mm.
Um,
Who's a very good coach too.
yeah, who moved on from Idaho to New Mexico and famously ruined UCLA's season early on. But he goes to San Diego State. He's an assistant there. Last December, gets promoted to defensive coordinator, and it was a defensive unit at San Diego State that kind of struggled the first year there, and kind of where things pick up. They're not a defense that causes it, or weren't a defense that caused a ton of havoc, but they were just extremely efficient, extremely well coached, and just really kind of made life difficult for opposing offenses. The stats from last year or this past season that are of note: number 7 in total defense, number 21 in rushing defense, 109 yards per game, number 5 in scoring defense, which I believe fell about 17 points per game from the previous year. They were tied number 1 nationally in red zone defense, which was a big topic of conversation for Nebraska this past year, where Nebraska was 135th. I mean, they only Rice was worse in that category. And so he flipped that defense very quickly. And, I think they're kind of hoping at Nebraska that he can bring a lot of kind of translate the things that he did at San Diego State to Nebraska, with obviously a different level that you're playing at, a little bit of a different approach and style than what you're playing at, than what you saw in the Mountain West. But it's hard to ignore the numbers and the success that they had early on. And his time there as a Broyles Award nominee, as one of the country's top assistants, and was a guy that, if it wasn't going to be Nebraska where he ended up, was going to be a very coveted name, not only in this cycle, but certainly going forward as well. I mean, I think the results are pretty eye-opening, certainly with caveats for how that kind of translates to the Big Ten, though.
Yeah, we're not going to pretend, at least I'm not, that I've watched the All-22 on San Diego State for multiple games. So it's one of those where you haven't seen him play a lot. But I think you're right in the sense that he's one of those younger coaches that within the coaching community, everybody knew about. Like, he could be the next big thing, and Nebraska's about to see that. But besides the stats you listed, they ended up number one in yards allowed per passing attempt, along with that rushing defense, which was, maybe you did say it, but only interesting to me because that was a stat. Of course, Nebraska was like number one for like 6 or 7 weeks in. And San Diego State ended up top of the ladder there at 5.1 yards per pass attempt. Nebraska ended up 6.0, of course, different levels. But it is impressive, too, what they did at San Diego State. And obviously, he was one of the lead factors in that, because they took over that program 2 years ago, and they had gone 4-8 in 23. And so they had the rebuild year last year where they're like 3-9, and they're scuffling a bit, but you're trying to get it in order the way you want it. So they went from 3 wins last year to 9 wins this year, and they shut 3 people out this season. And I got to look at it, but they held, what was it, 7 or 8 teams to like 7 points or less, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like to do that.
They shut out Cal. They shut out Stony Brook. Went on the road and shut out Fresno State. I watched a little bit of that Cal.
You saw
it aligned with my working patterns, and they really just kind of did whatever they wanted against that Cal offense. Had a couple defensive touchdowns in that game, and really kind of held a decent quarterback and a decent offense at bay in that one. What's kind of your, when you start talking about the transition from going like the Mountain West, which is a different approach, different offenses that you see than what you'll see in the Big Ten. But I mean, you're kind of just betting on, if you're Matt Rhule, that whatever magic you kind of had in that 1 year is going to translate to, a higher level, conceivably with more talent.
I think it's a fair question to at least raise the counterpoint to the hire about the experience or lack thereof, like in a power conference setting. Like, that's fair to do. I also think sometimes a head coach, or I wonder if someone like Rhule would say that sometimes is overbaked a little bit. Like, football is football. Everybody to a certain degree kind of copies each other. And at a certain point, you kind of, you sort of, everybody kind of knows what other people know in a way. Like, he's been a coach long enough at this point where he's picked up a lot of stuff. And even though he's younger than some guys, he might have that hunger factor. This will hit you perfectly. I always go to All the President's Men on something like this. And sometimes I do think this counts in every field of work, including coaching. And there's the part in All the President's Men where they're questioning whether Woodward and Bernstein should be the guys trying to break this story. And the editor says to Ben Bradley, one of the editors says, "They're hungry, Ben. Don't you remember when you were hungry?" And I do think that counts for something too. Sometimes when you get that guy with some juice. And what was Rhule's sentiment on Wednesday? it wasn't necessarily about scheme or anything like that. It was play style, and it was getting the kind of coach who could rally the troops was kind of the main takeaway quote. And you have to think that in his interview, that had to be a leading part. And I have to think like what the way Mike Eckler went about it with special teams had to be in the back of his mind too. You're almost searching for your defensive version of that. Like, is he able in the interview to get across how he can teach his stuff to players, but also you sense like that's the type of dude who guys are going to want to not fail just for not only themselves, but for that coach to not let him down. That's a big factor if you can find that hire. We'll see if it is, but that I think you're always kind of looking for that.
He runs a 4-2-5, some 3-man front, quarters coverage. Some stuff that I think can translate to the Big Ten. I mean, regardless of who is going to be in that chair next season, I mean, I think you're going to need to beef up things up front. Like, you're going to have to add more defensive line depth. You're going to need to find some linebackers that can run a little bit. So, kind of how all that comes together will be interesting to see. He's probably going to have some decisions if he wants to about, what the assistants on the defensive side of the ball look like. Addison Williams sounds like he'll be back if he wants to be, according to what Matt Rhule said last week. But kind of how all the pieces fall together on that, is something to watch going forward. And, I think the thing that helps too is, if you can get him around for the bowl games, bowl practices, be able to kind of see what's there. I mean, that's a pretty big advantage. And I think that's why you and I were talking about this before we started, that, in the coordinator carousel with all the head coaching moves that were made this offseason already, if you wanted your guy, you needed to act pretty quickly. And I think getting somebody in place and being able to really kind of take a good hard look at what you've got on the roster, that only benefits you as you kind of get ready for the portal season to start. And I think the thing too is, if you look at kind of how the roster was constructed at San Diego State last year, especially on defense, he put a lot of moving pieces together with guys that were transfers that had come into the program and really kind of made that work. So you at least kind of have that experience as well, where, you can kind of teach on the fly and get guys bought in quickly.
Yeah, I think the part you said there about getting coaches in here for like bowl practices, even if they're not like the coach in charge, like say, Phil Snow runs this thing, which I would expect, to coach it like through the Las Vegas Bowl against Utah. It's a big deal to get him on the ground, Orich, and start to not just evaluate guys and see their skill sets, but connect with them, have that base of, this is what I'm about, start those, begin those conversations. That's huge. And it's going to be huge with the O-line coach, who we'll get to in a second too. Cause I think, he's going to be here and part of those bowl practices. So, I don't know. It's a really fascinating hire, because he's not one of those guys where you have like a ton of data points to go look at, but the ones you see are really good. And there's a lot of ways to skin a cat with coaching hires. Like, I know sometimes there's something to be said for that veteran who's done it for 2 to 3 decades. We've also seen some of the brightest coaches we think of in college football today, and their stars begins, it shoots when they're in their early mid 30s. Honestly, that's when it starts to happen. And so if you catch the right guy who is a shooting star, it can make all the difference. And I'm guessing Rhule wouldn't have made the hire unless he didn't think that's sort of who this is.
That wasn't the only hire that came out this weekend. Quick turnaround at the offensive line spot. Donovan Raiola out after 4 years as offensive line coach. Jeep Wade, not confirmed by Nebraska, but the reported hire as coming in for Nebraska's offensive line coach. He's at Georgia Tech, Appalachian State before that. It's been a veteran offensive line coach. What do you make of that move? And it's, I think, especially based on the comments of Matt Rhule since the end of the season, and wanting to get the line question right, it probably shouldn't be a hugely surprising move.
Yeah, I mean, the one line he had was, in this league, in this stadium, in this weather, basically, you got to stop the run and you got to run the football. Nebraska did run the ball better at the end of the year, if we're going to be fair. I mean, obviously what Emmett was doing, and against Iowa, I thought was, it's kind of ironic. It was one of their better games up front. I thought about, moving a good defense. That said, I mean, there was a point in the middle of this season when Nebraska had no chance to have really a downfield passing threat because, and it wasn't all on the O-line by any means, but they could not pass protect. I mean, you think about starting with Michigan, it was like 6 or 7 sacks. Michigan State was 6 or 7 sacks, and then there was the 9 sacks against Minnesota. There was a point like 7 games into the year where Nebraska had allowed 25 sacks and was basically dead last in the FBS in that. And so, that's something you think about. And also, it was just always sort of inconsistent. Like they had their good moments, but when it was good, I think most people would say about the offensive line, they're okay. Like, like after like last year, I remember we had these conversations on podcasts just like this. It's like, yeah, they're okay, but you can never go really beyond that. And the one thing I will say is that group was very loyal to Donovan Raiola. And so it'll be interesting if there is some portal movement involved with that. There would be anyway, but when you have a coaching change. But I think this is the time to get a new set of eyes on it. I really do. It's a group that has a bunch of second and third year players we've always talked about, and we're curious, what's it look like behind the curtain? But the honest truth is we haven't really seen it. They've sort of stuck with this core of 6 or 7 guys who aren't in that younger circle. And so these bowl practices and what comes next, it does create a very interesting storyline about who's going to emerge from that younger crew. I mean, those guys should have a lot of juice this week and be on fire because they're about to, I think, start spring ball junior here in December with a new coach kind of evaluating them. I mean, it's a pretty interesting deal.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you're facing a Utah team in the bowl game that can play a little defense. They're pretty physical up front.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I think your point is correct that you're at kind of an interesting point in all of this where, and we've talked about this on past podcasts too, where you kind of have the moving out of the guys that have been here for 6, sometimes 7 years of, the Teddy Prohaska's are moving out, and Henry Lutovsky's, Rocco Spindler's not going to play in the bowl game. Turner Corcoran's moving on after this one. Like the time for that next wave of guys, if they're going to come in and be counted, it's basically, it starts today. I mean, that's when bowl practices start, and you got to figure out really what you have there and who can really help you. Because I think that was always in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, well, you've leaned so much on these veterans for so long and they've given you so much, but what's next? Even the guys that have been in the program for 3 years, you haven't really seen much of them. They've kind of shown up on number 2 spot on the depth chart and then fallen off, or they've switched spots. It's hard to know what that next group of guys looks like. And I mean, I think that's maybe the trouble, I guess, is when you had the injury issues this year or guys weren't performing, you didn't have somebody kind of ready to step in and give you some snaps. And I think that's what Nebraska's got to get more, get better at. I mean, they've recruited well up front, I think, but you just haven't seen enough of kind of that next step and next wave of guys being ready to step in and just go.
I'm glad you said that because I sometimes wondered if it was unfair, but I don't think it is. That there was that point where the injuries were happening, sort of October, early November. And I was thinking to myself, with as many guys as they have, and some of these guys are now in year 3, there should be somebody that we're pretty excited, like he's going to start this game against UCLA that's new. You know what I mean? Like I was thinking like your Grant Bricks or Preston Tamua or whoever it may be, Machachok, guys like that they might be ready to go or they might be close, but they weren't ready to pull the trigger on them quite yet. They were still sort of on the fringe even after those injuries. And that was the part where I guess I was a little disappointed or concerned about things, because I do think there was enough bodies or names that you thought maybe we would see one of those guys at that point. And I'm always the first to say that that's a position that in general is going to take guys sometimes into the third, fourth year to get it. I understand that on the surface, but the point being, they had so many names that you thought like there's got to be one or two's like ready to roll now, right? And it wasn't. Maybe they are, though. That's the question. We'll see. I mean, maybe some of those guys are going to show the new coach, and he's going to have his own opinions and stuff like that. Jeep Wade, if you look at his bio, they were very impressive running the football at Georgia Tech. Didn't give up a lot of sacks. So, the surface level stuff was all good. And now we see if he can bring it to the big, which is a different animal, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. A veteran hire at that spot, like you said, there was a lot of connections there. The Marcus Satterfield, they'd crossed paths at various stops, so definitely some familiarity there. But anything else? Nebraska's going to Vegas. That was known, but confirmed this week against a Utah team, and Nebraska will likely go as a double-digit underdog for that game.
They probably will, and it's a cool game though. I mean, it gives Nebraska, I guess, a shot to end that drought against ranked teams that we're still talking about that goes back to 2016. It'd be really nice if you could check that one off and not have that show up on the TV graphic going into next year. The thing with bowl games, and we've seen specific examples back when Nebraska routinely went to bowl games, if it's all about motivation. Like, I mean, the one year Nebraska had to play Washington again, that team was better than Washington, but they weren't interested in the game very much. And Washington beat them 19-7. And then the one year when Bo beat Georgia, and I think Georgia was a better team than Nebraska probably, but Nebraska was a little more juiced for that game. And so I don't count anybody out at first glance in these bowl games, because you don't know who's going to all be involved, first off, roster wise for each side. And then secondly, who's actually going to have the excitement to play in the game or more of it. And maybe Nebraska will have that. We'll see. We'll see if Utah's as fired up to play a 7-5 team that they're going to be told, then everyone's going to say you should beat by a couple touchdowns.
Well, the opt-outs are also a storyline, I think, in every bowl game that's not a playoff game. Utah's got a number of guys that are potential top 2 round, first or second round picks. Nebraska, the other news from the week, Emmett Johnson's going to pursue the NFL. So that's another kind of storyline there. Nebraska also quarterback and quarterback health and what that looks like with TJ Lateef is a big question mark as well. So it's going to be a fascinating couple of weeks here, bowl practices, to see where Nebraska's at and kind of what that roster is going to look like for the bowl game going into that one. But, Matt Rhule, I think, knew on Wednesday that Utah was going to be the matchup when he talked, basically said, this is, what if we play an opponent that does things that we're pretty not so great at in terms of stopping the run. Utah's got a top 5 rushing offense nationally, so that's going to be a challenge for a Nebraska defense that's kind of taken its lumps in the run game for most of the year.
What could be interesting in that matchup, though, Utah obviously had a great season, but we were tracking the one game late in November against Kansas State, which was bizarre. How many yards did K-State run for on them? Was it like 450, 500 yards or something?
Yeah, it was the odometer just kept ticking up as that game went along.
Utah won it.
Utah won it. 51-47. K-State had a guy run for 293, and K-State ran for 472 and 5 touchdowns, averaged 11.2 a carry in that one. So make of that what you will.
Yeah, and the next week I saw they played Kansas to finish out, I think, and it was like a 10-point game. And so I don't know. I mean, we can't. They're a good team, but I also think you got to be careful to
You don't want to make them the 85 Bears?
don't crown them. No, don't crown their tushies.
So, speaking of tushies and getting waxed, Nebraska basketball knocks off Creighton by 21 at home. You were there for that one.
Beat down.
Yeah, it was wire to wire. Creighton hasn't led in that game since 2023. So
that's amazing.
It's a heck of a stat. When you think about the way that that Creighton's kind of owned that series or had up until the last few years. Is Nebraska basketball for real? Are you comfortable saying that yet, or where are you at?
I mean, I feel really good about where they're at. This is a huge week still. Like I even said beforehand, if you had to tell me you can win one or the other, I would have actually taken Wisconsin over CU, which is the game ahead. A lot of people wouldn't say that, but I think it's such a big deal to get to 1-1 and get at least a split in these two Big Ten games that you sit on for a couple of weeks. Like, it would kind of stink after all this momentum. And I'm sure that's what Hoiberg is stressing to the guys right now. Like, things are rolling, but there is no time to rest on it, because if you give up these two games to start Big Ten play, it'll be a downer. Like that's going to be sort of deflating, but we'll get to that when we do. What happened so far is a very impressive non-con. And Greg McDermott said after the game, what's so impressive about this Nebraska team is how everybody sort of knows their role and just heightens it. Like they are a champion of what they are supposed to do. Like Sam Hoiberg, he pointed out, doesn't give a crap if he scores any points or what stat line looks like. It's just about winning. Now, Sam had an unbelievable game, played great on the defensive end. The whole squad did, but 15 points. He's become sort of timely with these drives to the basket. Like, he'll get 2 or 3 a game that just sort of always are, like in the win over Kansas State when we were watching that game in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he had a few of those where like Nebraska needed a bucket and he just got downhill and scored as a guy who's undersized compared to everybody else on the court. So that's been impressive. Like Burke is a good example, really struggling with the shot, but played a heck of a game defensively, had 13 rebounds. It's stuff like that. Everybody just sort of, this is what I excel at, and sort of feeding off each other and being happy for one another and what they're doing well. And it's got a good team vibe right now.
I don't know if you felt this, but it was striking in that game how Nebraska very much has like a dialed in rotation. They've got roles figured out. They've got, I think they've got matchups that they can throw on the floor that really cause problems for team. I mean, at one point in that game, you had Rink Mass driving to the hoop and kicking it out to a point guard for a 3-pointer. Like, it's everything fits with the way I think Fred wants to run it. And on the other hand, you had Creighton that felt like at times was just, running guys in and out, trying to find anything rotationally or, matchup wise to get going offensively. I mean, it was, just watching it at home, it was very clear that Nebraska was really dialed in for that one. Not only from, just how the players came out and played defensively, especially early on, but I thought coaching wise, it was really a pretty nice job.
Second year in a row that Nate Lenzer has put on a clinic in this game. He's the defensive guy who maps it out, and his guys just followed it. I mean, think about the game last year in Omaha, same deal that Nebraska never trailed. It was just, that was thought of after that game because I think that was a better CU team. Like, that was a gem. But yesterday was really was their best defensive performance of the year. Now, Creighton missed some shots. They were just all out of sorts. Like, a dude threw one off the side of the backboard.
Yeah, that was impressive.
Yeah, like 6 minutes in, it barely hit the side of the backboard, Bruns. Like, it almost like hit the apparatus behind it. It was just it was ugly on their side. But Rink Mast, is way better than I would dare say even Husker fans were probably giving credit. Like everybody loved Rink, thought good player. But now it's like, oh, he's up 2 notches from even what maybe the preseason thoughts were. Like when they did that all Big Ten stuff, Rink Mast, I don't think was close amongst Big Ten voters for like being in their top 10 guys or whatever.
No.
Well, you'd be hard pressed to tell me there's 10 more valuable guys to a team than Rink Mast is to Nebraska. So it'll be interesting how that plays out over the course of the season. But he is so good, not just at facilitating, but how often does, okay, we've seen it like 3 or 4 games this non-con. Nebraska's maybe in a little bit of a jam. You feel like the other team's got a little 4-0, 6-0 run going. Rink hits a 25-footer. You know, like he's been so timely with that. And kind of carried him to a victory over Winthrop like a week or so ago when there was kind of some danger there. He's just been amazing.
Yeah, it was. I think, I mean, we had talked about it a little bit, you know, Nebraska needing to get off to a fast start because it's not like they had, I don't think they were like playing with their food or anything like that at the start of some of these non-con games, but it felt like at times it's taken a little bit of time for them to kind of warm to the fight, especially at home. And I thought last night, you know, they were dialed in from the jump on defense. I mean, there was that 5-second call where, you know, Chris had nowhere to go with the ball. I mean, I think that was a reflection of the defensive effort that they were putting in, probably the scout team work that they had done in practice to prepare for Creighton, but they had the energy early on. And certainly, you know, to hold Creighton to 2 points, and it was at the 12-minute mark almost, was pretty impressive. And I was wondering if this group kind of had that kind of a defensive effort in them, because it's felt like in years past that was maybe how, you know, Fred's teams would win those bigger games, is that they would just be really dialed in defensively. And it felt like this year's group was maybe going to be one that just had to outscore teams, but they won in a different way last night.
Yeah, and let's not just scoop by the fact, I mean, they lose Connor Asige into the season. I mean, that could have been a killer, but they've just carried on. And they haven't had Oogie available at all yet. Now that could change in about a week and a half. That's sort of the hope. That's kind of been the timetable, I think, for those last 2 non-con games to finish out the 2025 calendar. Hopefully he gets some action there and sort of a runway into Big Ten play. I think he's a player too that can matter, like in the rotation, like if he can get healthy. And so they've done it without him. Everybody has just sort of been the best version of what, like, if you could have like tried to picture like, okay, what's the best version of him that could realistically be so far? That's sort of happened. Like Sam Hoiberg is that version in his senior year. I'd say Braden Frere as a redshirt freshman is probably like, you wouldn't just expect a guy that hadn't played in any college basketball games this year to just jump right in and have the confidence that he shows. Like, you know, there was a sequence Sunday where the game never really got close, but CU had scored a few, and Frager answers with a take and an and one, you know, as a redshirt freshman. And so that's been good. And Price Sanford, that was a storyline in yesterday's game. There were a bunch of Iowa transfers on each side, and Price Sanford was the best guy on the court of those guys.
Big win for Nebraska as they continue to kind of dominate the series, I think is probably fair over the last couple matchups, last 3-4 years.
Who's your daddy chant came into play, and an NIT chant.
Yeah, the NIT one, that was the one that was a little
you didn't know if that applied well
enough. That was aggressive. I like a little aggression. But big one against Wisconsin on Wednesday, and then on the road Saturday against Illinois. Is that when they're heading to Champaign?
That's a situation. So there's like, that's where what we're saying. There's just no chance to like to celebrate or buy the boys some Pellegrinos, as Fred Hoiberg said in the post game. So yeah, you gotta get right back at it. That's their mindset though. The thing that I think they have that is good for this team, they do have a lot of veterans and sort of guys with that nature who I don't think it's hard for Hoiberg to like keep them level. You know what I mean? And so today we're doing this just prior to the rankings coming out. They could get ranked. We'll see. They're 24 in the net, but I don't think that's going to be a thing over there. It's, like where there's too much patting themselves on the back, because they know they're 0-0 now in league, and I think they're very determined to not let what happened last year at PBA, where Nebraska let their guard down last season at home. It wasn't the vault, and so they've got to get that nickname to be the correct definition again for how they play.
We'll see if Nebraska can lock it up on Wednesday against the Badgers. You got anything else? I'm kind of talked out. It was a big weekend.
No, there's a lot going on. It's going to continue that way, which is good. And we're not even to the portal part yet, and that's going to be insane.
Yeah, getting ready for the insanity that's coming down the road. Nebraska begins bowl practices this week. We'll have some kind of availability, I'm guessing. Haven't heard final word on that, but plenty to discuss with the new hires and much, much more at Husker 24/7.